Delfina Poletti was terrified. There was nothing in her Catholic upbringing, neither anything the nuns who taught at her local school nor anything her parents shared at home, could have done to prepare her for the situation unfolding in front of her. Since the night her cousin Nick came home to break the news he'd stolen bank statements, forged documents, then lost Delfina's parents' restaurant in a high-stakes poker game, her world was turned upside down on its head. Not only did he lie and steal from his family, but he used his mediocre forgery skills to inflate the value of the restaurant upwards of $1 million. He then apparently led the people at the poker table to believe it was a Michelin-rated restaurant where people from all over New York State came to eat. The truth was it was worth $100,000, if that, and the only people driving all over the state were the truckers who ate there. Nick thought it was a sure thing when his poker hand of 4 of a kind, all aces. Ercole Muraro pulled out a straight flush 7 through Jack. Muraro was quick to find out Nick bet stakes he didn't have, and he wanted his money or the equivalent. Not 30 minutes after Nick's confession, which her parents were still reeling from, she and her cousin Caprice were ordered to hide in the bedroom closets and not come out no matter what. Muraro, accompanied by his men, showed up to get his payment in the form of Nick's head. It turned out Ercole Muraro was connected to an Italian mafia, and despite the game being a personal one, he was using his power to collect his debts. While Nick and her parents were being assaulted, Delfina and Caprice were struggling to not sob aloud. Ercole Muraro's thugs went through the house looking for any and all valuables which might be used towards the $1 million debt. What the thugs found were 2 women huddling together in a closet, terrified. Dragged downstairs by their hair and thrown at Ercole's feet, the elderly man stumbled backwards and then ordered his men to cease. He'd found what he wanted to take in exchange for the lives of Nick and Delfina's parents. Now, Delfina Poletti was officially Delfina Muraro, a 21-year-old bride to a 76-year-old man with an axe to grind and a point to prove. 1 week ago, in Ercole's office in front of a cleric, 4 witnesses she was married. When she used her new cell phone to search, the witnesses on the internet were all in the Mafia in one way or another. She was now Ercole's wife, and he intended they were husband and wife in every sense of the word, and his friends were there to enforce it if necessary. He made sure she knew there was no escape. If she didn't willingly get into his bed, their agreement came to an end and her cousin and parents would die. She couldn't lie and say Ercole was rough with her in their marital bed. He'd taken exceptionally good care to ensure she was given pleasure, and her first time being with a man was gentle. However, no amount of his care during the deed made up for the fact she was made to feel like a whore paying a debt owed by her family with her body to a man who not only terrified her, but one she despised. Delfina, his deep voice cut into her thoughts, I understand your tiny brain cannot comprehend more than a few simple instructions at a time, but may I remind you not to fuck this up? There will be important people here this evening. My godson is here and I'm quite excited to see him. He was out of the country all week and he's back today. My daughter and her children are here as well. My grandson is not a total waste of space, but the rest of them are useless. Do not under any circumstances think they can do anything to save you or help you. My daughter moved out before her 18th birthday when she was married to the fuckwad she calls her husband. I see her monthly, but otherwise I avoid the group of them. They're smart, but they grate on my nerves. They will pay you the respect you deserve as my wife. He paused, or else. Yes, Ercole. Good. Kiss me. She blinked at him and then leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. He tasted of whiskey and mint. She did have to give it to him, he was all about hygiene and health. He ran every morning. He worked out for hours. He took pride in his fitness. She supposed it was because he was quite possibly the ugliest man she'd ever had the misfortune to meet. She didn't know which eye to look at as they both seemed to stare in opposite directions. He sported only a few strands of hair which were combed over his shiny scalp, his nose was bulbous and clearly broken multiple times in the past, and his mouth was far too wide for his face. He was quite possibly what little children saw in their minds when they thought of the boogeyman. When a man was this ugly, inside and out, it made sense he made up for his shortcomings with a body to defy time. His tongue slipped into her mouth, and she fought not to gag as he ravished her while the car drew to a halt outside the hotel where the Christmas party for his company was being held. It's too bad we're here already. I'd like you on you, my cock. She tried to control her shudder of revulsion as she nearly jumped from her skin when the door pulled open, and the driver extended his hand to Ercole. She tugged downward on the short skirt Ercole dressed her in. It was barely an inch below her ass and the cleavage was so deep her nipples were barely concealed and her navel was not. She felt like a hooker, albeit a high-end one. Once again, she cursed neck in her head and prayed. He surfaced from his coma. Ercole's men put him in if only for her to be able to kick him in the balls. Entering the brightly lit and cheerful ballroom on Ercole's arm, she looked around the room and her eyes caught sight of a man in the far corner of the room, leaning against the bar, talking to a woman who nodding vigorously. His eyes met hers and he straightened up. She knew him, Furio Matrone. Ercole's godson and quite possibly the most handsome man she'd ever seen in her life. However, he scared her even more than Ercole did. While her brain feared him more than anything in the world, her foolish body craved him even more. When she'd met him in Ercole's office, her body sprung to life only to retreat into itself when he congratulated her and Ercole on their nuptials and winked at Ercole to enjoy his wedding night. He then told her bluntly if she did anything to upset his godfather it was Furio Matrone who she would have to deal with. She took the threat seriously. Despite how beautiful of a male specimen he was, with a tall muscular frame, deep brown eyes and long glossy black hair tied at the back of his head in a man bun, he scared her. Ercole told her the man was closer to 50 than 40, something the men all teased Furio about and he'd taken good-naturedly, but his eyes never returned back on Delfina the rest of the time he'd been in the house. There was something about his power which oozed off him and she'd overheard Ercole call him capo. When she researched it, it seemed this man was Ercole's boss. Despite being his godson, Furio Matrone outranked the older, more experienced man and it, in and of itself was bloody terrifying. Across the room he gave her a curt nod and returned his attention to the woman beside him. Movement at the side of the room caused Ercole's grunting to reoccur. There is my idiot daughter and her offspring. Only thing the woman was good for was birthing children intellectually superior to her. Be on your behavior, Delfina. Yes, Ercole, she whispered as she looked in the direction of his daughter and children. For some reason, she'd expected the children to be young. Instead, his daughter Olympia was quite possibly the same age as Delfina's mother and her children were older than Delfina, if only by a decade or so. Maybe she could make friends with them, and life with Ercole wouldn't be so hard. She saw the way Olympia's son's eyes widened when he saw her and the beginning of a smile curved his lips. He was handsome and devastatingly so. She could picture him on the cover of GQ magazine in one of those fancy suits. She bet even his underwear were ironed and pressed, he seemed so well put together. She hoped they'd be able to get along. Ah, mistletoe. Ercole's words caused her to freeze before looking up and swallowing nervously. Be my wife, Delfina. Do not let anyone in this room believe you are anything other than my wife. Yes, Ercole. She leaned into him to press a chaste kiss to his lips and nearly groaned with disgust and irritation when his meaty hands grabbed her by the ass, grinding her against his pelvis and shoving his tongue so far down her throat she was sure he reached her esophagus. The murmurs which filled the room as Ercole pretty much sucked her face raw, messing her hair and her makeup with total disregard for his inappropriate behavior. As if he wanted the entire room to know they were sleeping together, he broke the kiss and declared loudly, "God damn, I can't wait to go home and fuck you until dawn." Yes, Ercole, she nodded her agreement while her stomach struggled not to empty its contents on the floor. A quick look around the room told her Furio Matrone was nowhere to be seen and Olympia and her family were glaring at her as if she'd shot the family dog. It wasn't hard to read the woman's lips. Gold-digging slut. Great. Something told Delfina nothing short of a miracle was going to make her married life with Ercole Muraro anything short of a hell on earth. Shooting a glance at the man gripping her hand tight in his as he dragged her across the room, for the first time in her entire life, Delfina prayed for a man to die because it was the only way she was getting out of this marriage. All she needed to do was outlive him. And to my eldest grandson, Ruggero Orfeo Rapalino, I leave you my house, all of its contents, my collection of automobiles and $500 million. Ruggero heard his sister grumble from beside him as their grandfather, Ercole Muraro's, will was read. The dead man was an old-school misogynist but leaving his two sisters Ernestina and Perla each $50,000 when he possessed a billion-dollar estate was a slap in the face to the women. In their shoes he'd be pissed off as well. His mother, the daughter of the crotchety old bastard who was now deceased, was bequeathed jewelry from a safe deposit box resting on his desk. It was even more insulting than the measly lump sum his sisters received because the jewelry belonged to Ruggero's grandmother. It meant his grandfather wasn't leaving his only child, his daughter, anything of his own estate, but rather simply passing on the jewels he'd guarded once his first wife passed away. Ruggero's father was also to receive nothing because, according to the will, he never wanted his daughter to marry Eusebio Rapalino. What about his wife? Eusebio spoke up suddenly. Nobody has seen her since he suffered his heart attack 6 weeks ago. I presume the rest of the estate is going to her. No. He left her nothing. The rest goes to charity. They were all in shock. Ruggero cleared his throat as he thought of the bombshell brunette he'd fantasized about more than once. She's been with him for 3 years. She was 21 when he married her. Are you saying after 3 years living with his old ass and sleeping in his bed? He and his sisters exchanged disgusted glances as they all recalled the time they'd walked into his home office to see the old man nailing the girl on his desk. He left her with nothing? Mr. and Mrs. Muraro signed an ironclad agreement. She entered their marriage with nothing and left it with nothing. Oh, I can't wait to go to the house and throw her out, Perla hissed with glee. They'd set up a guard outside their grandfather's funeral to keep her out, but now, with Ruggero getting the keys to the estate, they'd be able to toss her on her gold-digging, 20-something-year-old ass. A confused expression on the lawyer's face caused Ruggero to question him. What is it? Mrs. Muraro would have vacated the premises the moment Mr. Muraro was declared deceased per their agreement. She should not still be in residence. In fact, I'm quite certain she has returned to her family. I'm sorry, what now? His mother Olympia leaned forward, and it was a posture the entire family duplicated. Their marriage was one of contract. Valente di Camillo spoke solemnly. I personally drew up the contract, Mrs. Rapalino. Mrs. Muraro was not afforded a single penny during her marriage or following the death of Mr. Muraro. I saw her wearing my mother's jewelry. Olympia's face was red as she fought the anger which always rose when she thought of the tramp who'd seduced her father. She and her father were never close, but the woman caused a greater estrangement, and Olympia hated her on sight. Which has all been returned and is in this box. The lawyer tapped the top of the container. I personally verified the contents before this meeting. There is not a gemstone out of place. I don't believe you. Surely, she kept something. I have no reason to lie to you, Mrs. Rapalino. I'm certain your father has a copy of his marriage contract in his home somewhere since we kept one. He kept one and his wife kept one. Why on earth would a woman, especially one who was 21, agree to a marriage contract to an 80-year-old man which would leave her with nothing? Ruggero voiced the question they were all thinking. Now the lawyer looked quite uncomfortable. I cannot answer that. Why not? You clearly know more than the rest of us. Client-attorney privilege bars me from revealing more than the marriage was a contract. If there is more information, it could be in the home. However, I'm not privy to share more than what I have. Your grandfather, Mr. Rapalino, the lawyer addressed Ruggero's question, let me know I could divulge it was a contract marriage, but no other details were permitted. She must have gotten a lump sum, Ernestina, the youngest of the siblings, griped. Nobody fucks a 100-year-old man for nothing when they're her age. He wasn't 100, Olympia grumbled. Close enough, Ernestina shot back. Again, I cannot comment on their marriage other than the contract stipulated she entered and left with nothing. He's dead. Surely you can tell us, Olympia pushed again. Attorney-client privilege extends beyond death, Mrs. Rapalino. Then what about the rest of his estate? Olympia threw her hands up in irritation. You've accounted for half of his wealth. He has a company and businesses. The lawyer took a deep breath. As you know, your father stepped down as CEO a year ago. The man he appointed as his successor will continue to run the company and actually initiated the buying out your grandfather's shares a year ago, and this was legally settled 6 months ago. What? Ruggero was stunned. You're kidding me. There is no way he was of his right mind if he sold off the shares of his company. He lived and breathed the company. Mr. Rapalino, your grandfather was of sound mind. In fact, when he broached the sale one of the company, I personally asked for him to be psychologically assessed and he agreed. Until the day your grandfather passed away, he was sharper than any man I've ever met. Why did he sell? Perhaps he knew he wasn't going to live forever. Mr. Rapalino, you were never going to take over his company. He admired and appreciated your brain and your intellect, but he was well aware the offspring of his only child kept their own agendas in life. You are running a Fortune 500 company and a billionaire in your own right. He addressed Perla, "You're a high-profile attorney," and made it clear to him at a family function you would never want to run his company. He looked at Ernestina. "You teach quantum physics at the university and do not have a brain for business. None of you were prepared to run his company." He wanted it to continue after his death, and in securing the sale and naming the person he trusted most to run his company, he knew he could die in peace and know his legacy would continue. The person he trusted most. "I'm his daughter." "Who did he trust more than me?" The silence from the lawyer insinuated Ercole Muraro essentially trusted everyone but her, and she folded her arms in a huff. "Where are his profits from the sale?" "If he sold off his shares, he should have more than what was mentioned in the will." Ruggero questioned. "He sold it for $1 million. Now the room was shocked to silence. After several long seconds, Ruggero whispered, "Impossible. It is why I insisted he prove he was of sound mind. We knew when this came out, his family would question it. I assure you, the sale, though kept quiet, was legal." "Why only $1 million? It was worth at least $500 million or more." The Zebu was clutching the edge of his chair. He was swindled. Ruggero considered even though his father hated his grandfather with a burning passion, even he was worried the old man had been duped. He admitted he was of the same mindset. The lawyer gave a loud sigh. "Mr. Rapalino, while I appreciate your concerns, the company and the shares of the company are not part of the estate. What I have revealed today, aside from a very large contribution to a handful of charities his previous wife, your mother," he nodded at Olympia, "was a patron of, and a few animal shelters in the state of New York, there is no other money." "What are the chances his wife contests this?" Perla went back to Delfina. "I have a copy of the marriage agreement. Should she attempt to do such a thing, it would be open and shut in front of a judge. She has no grounds." He rose from the boardroom table. "I will leave this with you." He slid the will, accompanying documents, and the safety deposit box across the table. "I do have another meeting, but please, take all the time you want. I think we're good." Ruggero spoke for his family and rose from his seat. He passed the contents of the safe deposit box to his father and then took all the documents into his possession. He shook the lawyer's hand and then followed his family out of the offices. "None of this makes sense," Eusebio muttered as they got into the elevator together. "I can't believe he didn't give her a thing. I really expected to see her here in one of those low-cut dresses she loves to wear and dripping in gold, begging to take our inheritance." "I agree." Ruggero nodded as he kept his sisters close to his side, dropping a kiss on top of Perla's head before doing the same to Ernestina. "He was a prick, but this is low even for him." "What if she was blackmailing him?" Ernestina questioned, looking up at her brother. "With what?" Ruggero questioned, "And more importantly, if she was blackmailing him, why was she letting him?" He almost gagged with the memory. "Fuck her." His mother swatted at him, but he stared back at her seriously. "Come on, Ma. You saw her. She was a 10. A 10 all the way. He was barely a 4. The first time he'd met his grandfather's wife, he'd sported an instant erection which immediately deflated when the old man kissed her passionately under a ball of mistletoe with tongue and an ass grab which made Ernestina snort wine out her nose. He wouldn't lie and say he hadn't more than once got hard in the following 3 years simply from one look at her. However, every time he looked sideways at her, his grandfather would smugly mark her like he was a dog pissing on a hydrant. If she was blackmailing him, why was she the one suffering through his old and decrepit dick? "Can we not talk about my father's sex life?" Olympia rubbed her forehead and collected herself as the elevator doors opened. "Maybe there are answers at the house. Let's go to the house and go through it with a fine-tooth comb." Ruggero decided it was the best course of action, and if he happened to stumble across Delfina Muraro's secret stash of lingerie or lace panties, then all the better. Maybe he'd finally have more than a simple fantasy to get him to sleep tonight. "Order up." Delfina grabbed the plates on the metal warming shelf and layered them along her forearm and then turned to take the food to the group of people waiting at the table. It was a busy morning, and she was grateful of the pace. Setting the plates in front of her customers, she smiled. "Is there anything else I can get for you?" "No, ma'am, this looks wonderful." One of the 3 truckers beamed at her. The one sitting in the booth across his 2 friends looked her over. "Unless you want to give me your number. My truck has a cot." As tempting as the offer is, she continued smiling despite the revulsion curling down her spine because she could smell the man as much as she could see him. "My partner is not the sharing kind." She gave a nod and walked away, cursing once again how close the family restaurant was to the truck stop up the road. She lied through her teeth to get away from the men. She had no partner. The man she'd lived with for the last 3 years suffered a massive heart attack just over 6 weeks ago, and she'd run from the scene like her life depended on it. She'd accompanied Ercole to the hospital in the ambulance, praying to God with all her might he didn't wake up. She'd been praying for his death from the minute she'd met the man, and she'd been granted a front row seat to it. She wasn't sure whether it was the God or the devil she'd prayed to who made her dreams come true, but she owed one of them her soul for it. When they arrived at the hospital, the paramedics were screaming at doctors to save the notorious Italian billionaire rumored to have ties to the mob out of nothing more than fear his family would sue the hospital if he died. She stood nervously rubbing her biceps with her hands, trying desperately to not let her giddiness show as they worked valiantly on saving him. Her face hidden behind a handful of tissues to stop her smile, and fake sobs covered the giggles. His time of death being called coincided with the time Olympia Rapalino, accompanied by her husband and children, descended on the hospital. The woman hated Delfina from the minute they'd been introduced 3 years ago, and she knew in her shoes, she would have hated Delfina too. Ercole did everything he could to needle his only child by flaunting his much younger bride in her face. When Olympia told her to get the fuck out of the hospital room, she joyfully obeyed, despite knowing the man who was now dead would have been furious at Olympia's treatment of her. Only Ercole was allowed to demean and insult Delfina, not anyone else. Delfina knew something else Olympia didn't, and it was how much the old man barely tolerated his only child. Ercole hated Olympia's mother, his first wife. Delfina knew his first wife Claudia baby-trapped him. The fact she couldn't even have been a boy made the irritation at the unwanted baby increase, and Ercole never truly accepted the child. His hate of the women in his life then carried over to every woman he'd ever met. While he didn't loathe her the way he did others, his dislike of the female population included Delfina. Ercole took great pleasure in humiliating her at every turn. If he could humiliate her and Olympia simultaneously, then it only fueled his excitement. She loathed the events and parties where he could traipse her around on his arm, because it meant she was forced to endure his excitement at feeling like the world's greatest asshole. He reveled in it. The cruelty he gave his family, he doled out to her in equal measures. Pushing the horrible thoughts of the horrible man aside, she pushed into the kitchen. She gave a smile to her mother, who was busy mashing another pot of potatoes. She leaned over and kissed her cheek. "You look flushed, Mom. You should take a break. It's too busy. We should hire another cook." "We cannot afford to hire another cook." Her mother wiped her brow with her forearm. "The dinner rush will wind down shortly." Delfina looked at her mother and sighed, knowing arguing with her would be futile. She started to walk away when her mother grabbed her arm and pulled her back. "I'm sorry for snapping at you, Deli. I feel bad you are here working in the diner when you should be out living your life in a real kitchen. Mom, for the last 3 years all I've wanted was to come home and work alongside you. I miss coming in early in the morning and making the desserts for the day. This is home to me, and it's all I wanted." "I'm sorry," Tiziana Paletti whispered softly, staring into her daughter's eyes. Delfina cupped her mother's cheeks, tucking hair behind the older woman's ears. "I love you. I would live 1,000,000 years with Ercole Muraro if it meant keeping you and Papa safe." She kissed her forehead. "Now, get those potatoes up to snuff." She patted the shoulder of the only other cook in the kitchen, her cousin Caprice, who was busy forming meatloaves in a bunch of pans. Caprice and her brother Nick were sent to live with their aunt and uncle from Italy when they were mere teenagers. Initially Delfina was excited to have the older cousins living with them, until Caprice turned out to think Delfina was her servant and Nick was chaos on legs. It was Caprice's older brother who caused the insanity 3 years ago with Ercole and brought the bastard into her life. Ercole Muraro was a very rich thug. He wasn't very tall, barely 5 feet 10 inches tall. He wasn't even remotely handsome despite his very toned and strong physique. The man was also bloody brilliant, always 10 steps ahead of the rest of the crowd. Frequently, she'd been forced to sit in a meeting with Ercole, on his lap, with someone who'd owed him a great deal of money. He'd frequently been able to not only calculate how long it would take to pay off the amount but to calculate the interest accrued, and he did it to the penny without a calculator. His intelligence was second to none. Well, except the CEO, but he was a whole other kettle of fish. Ercole's brilliance, however, was often shuttered by his cruelty and greed. Her naivety did not prepare her for the horrors she was about to endure when she'd taken next punishment. If she balked about performing her conjugal duties, he would bring up the CCTV stream from the kitchen of her parents' diner and point his fingers like a gunshot to her father's head. Her humiliation, though, at having to perform in their marital bed came with a price. Ercole was a gifted lover with an insight into the female anatomy, and he wouldn't be content unless he eked out multiple orgasms before his own. He took delight in knowing she loathed him with a burning passion, yet the minute his lips were on her, she was helpless to stop her own body from responding. Her parents never stopped trying to offer money to get her to come home, but Ercole always refused. If she left Ercole, Nick and her father would die. She'd seen Ercole kill a man without blinking, the same one he'd calculated the loan interest on, and as such, she knew he meant what he said. So, every night she would pray to God while clutching her rosary, her family, and then follow with prayers to the devil in exchange for her soul. If only she would escape the clutches of this abhorrent human being and the self-loathing she experienced at his hands, she would do anything. She discovered, thanks to Ercole, she was a highly sexual woman, but he left her too exhausted to even consider doing anything for her own emotional pleasure. She once told him when he died, she was going to fuck 100 different men to prove he wasn't the only one who gave her orgasms. He'd fucked her unconscious that night. She screamed at him she wished he would croak from the exertion, but he'd only made her come more. She hated him. Her body loved his cock. Then, after 3 long, painful years, he died. His staff called the paramedics while she stood there watching while joy flooded her body. She kept in a secure location a copy of the marriage contract which clearly stated upon his death, all debts of her family were considered paid. She was free and clear to live her life without any liability. The day after his death, her parents received a copy of the deed to the restaurant with no mortgage outstanding on it and a note from the lawyer confirming all debts were paid. She was free. She took a breath and walked back to the busy diner. If she never heard the name Ercole Muraro again, it would be too soon. However, there was one thing missing from her life right now, and it was an orgasm. Looking around the diner her religious parents owned, somehow, she knew she wasn't getting it here. Abortion is a sin, Delphina, her mother whispered quietly while clutching her rosary around her neck. Her words made Delphina want to punch the table until it cracked open. Caprice, the woman who once treated Delphina like the dirt beneath her shoes but now considered her a sister after saving her only sibling's life, shot her Aunt Tiziana a sideways glare. I cannot have this child, Mother. Aunt Tizi, you cannot expect her to give birth to a baby born out of rape. Caprice was vehement as her aunt made the sign of the cross on her chest and prayed loudly for guidance from above. She willingly went to his bed, her father said with a sad expression, tugging his lips downward. Delphina stared at her parents knowing they were deeply religious, and while they loved her and wanted desperately to give her the best in life, they were devout in their faith. In the eyes of the church an abortion was murder. Delphina felt pretty strongly otherwise, and she pushed from the table as her cousin and father debated whether it was rape if a woman was coerced to have sex or watch her family be murdered. She collected the home pregnancy kit from the table where she'd set it to announce her problem and tossed it in the garbage, willing her tears to stay at bay. She no longer shared the faith of her parents. Living with a demon for 3 years did that to a person. The night before his fatal heart attack, Ercole was particularly amorous, and she remembered having an inkling he'd taken twice his Viagra dose. What his will and lust couldn't do, his little blue pills could. The man, as disgusting as he was, could fuck. She felt her body immediately responding to the memory of his oversized cock and the way his mouth could eat a pussy dry, and again hated herself with a burning passion. Maybe she needed counseling. Delphina, surely you don't think you could go through with an abortion? Her mother said again, when we reach heaven, I want us all there. Mom, I prayed for a man to die every night for 3 years. When he dropped like a sack of potatoes in front of me, I stood back trying not to laugh and offered no assistance while his housekeeping staff tended to him because I wanted him to die. I don't think taking misoprostol is going to weigh heavier than watching my husband die in front of me and being happy about it. If she has this baby, it's going to be ugly. I mean, it's going to be, hit every branch of the ugly tree on the way down. Ugly? Caprice folded her arms. I don't even know how you endured sex with him without puking every time. God, if there is anyone you would beg to be capable of only a 2-minute hump and dump, it would have been his ugly face. She looked over her shoulder at Caprice. It took me 3 months to stop vomiting when he touched me. By then he'd known her body so well he'd have sex with her until she passed out. Eventually she struggled to sleep if his arms were not wrapped around her. She wasn't sure who she hated more for it, him, or her. Even now, sleeping was still a problem, but she bought long body-length pillows and tucked them into her bed while putting a hot water bottle in the pillowcase, and while it wasn't perfect, it was helping. The internet was good for nothing if not for troubleshooting weirdness. What's going on? Nick came into the kitchen dragging his bad leg behind him. Along with a busted kneecap, a concussion and multiple broken ribs, the way they'd stabbed his leg over and over again made it so he'd never walk straight again. At least he was alive. Delphina is pregnant. He turned startled brown eyes to her, not from the old goat. When I left the house the morning he died, I left everything behind. I wasn't even thinking of my birth control pills. In fact, I haven't thought of them since. Birth control is a... Mom, stop, Delphina held up her hand. He was my husband, and he insisted I took the pill. I obeyed my husband per my contract. I knew the price of disobeying. I messed up by not taking them after I left, mostly because for the last 8 weeks, I've been slowly getting my own life back. Now it's all going to be taken from me again. If I have a child, I'm going to forever be reminded of Ercole's cruelty. Don't have it, Nick said bluntly. Aunt Teasy and Uncle Arsenio are reading the Bible to her, Caprice snorted angrily, flipping her long dark hair over her shoulder. I cannot believe you would want her to keep this abomination. I'll drive you. Nick looked around the kitchen. Let me find my car keys and I'll take you now to the nearest clinic. Did you have any love for him at all? After 3 years of living with him, of being with him day in and day out, many arranged marriages start out rocky and turn into loving. All of them signed the same non-disclosure agreements, and while they could talk amongst the 5 of them, nobody outside the walls could ever know what happened back then, or they would lose everything from the restaurant to Nick's head. At the kitchen table was the only place they ever spoke about what happened, and never to an outsider. They knew the rules and knew better than to mess with Muraro's mobsters, who were likely still watching. Despite this, she let her frustration with her mother overflow and laid out some plain truths. Mom. Delphina's tone was sharp now. The weekend before he died, he brought me to his office, the one where he did all of his dirty work, and made me sit there while he tortured a man who owed him $50,000. He took 2 fingers off each of the man's hands. He made me hold the fingers in a plastic bag, and after he cut fingers off both hands, he grinned at me and said, "This could have been your cousin except with his neck and head instead of hand and fingers." Then, while they dragged the screaming man out of the room, he wanted to have sex on his desk despite the fact there were fingers on the desk and blood all over the floor. So no, Mom, I can assure you, I did not have any love for him at all. It didn't matter she missed his dick. She watched as Nick moved as quickly as his leg would allow to the sink and vomited while her mother fell back in her chair as if on the verge of fainting. Caprice lifted one of her fingers and whispered, "Did you have sex with him in the room?" "Yes. If I refused sex, it was a violation of our contract, which meant a hit would be carried out on Dad and Nick and the restaurant would be destroyed. I knew my place, and it was silently at my maniacal husband's side or moaning in his ear on command." "Did he hit you?" Nick reached for paper towel to wipe his mouth, pale and trembling. "No. He never hit me. He never raised his voice to me. He never once was rough with me. The only bruises left on my body were when he got too carried away with his," she shuddered, "activities. He was also never kind to me. The only pleasant conversations we ever shared were right before he fell asleep at night. Even dinner conversations, if they took place, were cold. He used me to torture his family, made me wear his dead wife's jewels to family dinner to torment his daughter. He would lift up the wedding ring he put on my hand, which once adorned hers, and would make a show of kissing it in front of her. He was such a prick." Nick leaned against the fridge. "You brought him into our lives," Caprice accused angrily. "Your greed almost got you and Uncle Arsenio killed, and Aunt Tiziana had her hands broken for trying to stop them from taking her." "I know." He shot a sorrowful gaze at Delphina. "I am sorry. I learned my lesson and I'll never gamble again, but I owe you my life, Delphina. I don't care what Aunt Teasy says. If you want to drive to the clinic, I'll take you. You need to weigh this decision carefully," her father said gently. "Once it is done, it is not one you can undo. Pray on it, Delphina. We are headed to church. Join us this morning and pray." "I'm not ready," she shook her head at her father's suggestion. I'm going to go to the restaurant to see how this morning's shift is going and maybe bake a couple of pies. You haven't come to church in 3 years. She shot a sideways glance at her mother, and I don't think a few more weeks of me getting my bearings and readjusting to life outside of the prison I was in for the last few years is going to make an ounce of difference to the big guy upstairs. He knows my heart, and kneeling and taking communion isn't going to cause the anger I'm dealing with to dissipate. You're angry. Wouldn't you be? Caprice said quietly. 3 years ago, Nick threw our lives into turmoil and risked all of our lives to a mob boss who decided he wanted to sleep with Delphina, and for the last 3 years, every day night she's been forced to endure the agony of being with someone she hates while she waved around the table, continued to live our lives as if nothing changed. All she gets to show for her sacrifice is judgmental parents who use the Bible against her, her old bedroom which hasn't been touched in years, and a job in an Italian-American diner dealing with bitchy customers who hit on her all day. She gave away her soul for 3 years for us to be able to continue to live our lives. If not for the fact the bastard croaked, she would still be there while we're still plugging along. She has the right to be angry, Aunt Teasy. Leave her alone. Delphina gave her cousin a smile and a nod but opted to say nothing more. Collecting her purse and her coat, she left her mother's kitchen table and headed out into the world, and knowing one thing was for certain, she was not having this thing stay in her body longer than necessary. Ercole Muraro had already stolen everything else from her. He wasn't getting the rest of her life